I'm sure we may have others join us as we keep going, and they'll keep coming in. But good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the online engagement session as a part of the Building Connected Communities, Adapting to the Climate Crisis Through Nature program of the New Brunswick Environmental Network. And we'll talk about some of our partners later as well. Bienvenue tout le monde à la session d'engagement en ligne pour les sessions.
She's now repeating in French her welcome. Building Connected Communities, switch back to English, I'm assuming.
So we do have interpretation available today. So if you would like to listen to all of the presentations today in English, you can select go to the interpretation button on the bottom right of your screen. Entendre ce événement aujourd'hui en français, vous pouvez cliquer sur le bouton d'interprétation.
So she's now explaining in French how to click on the interpretation button at the bottom of the screen to go French or English. Switch to English.
To the climate crisis, especially when we talk about adapting through nature, it's incredibly important to consider not only how the climate crisis is impacting Indigenous peoples and practices across this land, but also that many of the roots of the climate crisis are heavily interconnected with colonialism and the challenges that Indigenous communities have faced since colonialism. And that as we think about how we work with nature to adapt to the climate crisis, many of the learnings that we're building on come out of the traditional knowledge of Indigenous peoples across this land. So part of doing this work also needs to be thinking about reconciliation and decolonization. So today we're going to have a brief introduction and presentation to this project in NatureBased Climate Solutions. And then we'll move into a breakout group discussion in which you'll have the chance to learn about other people who are here today and talk about how you're experiencing climate change and how nature-based climate solutions can work for you. And there'll be an opportunity at the end of each breakout session to share back some of the main findings with the larger group here. And then we'll end off with an overview of the next steps of the project and any time for any questions. And there'll be a short break in the middle. So I want to pass it over to my colleague, Annika, to give you a bit of an introduction to the New Brunswick Environmental Network today.
Donc, je vais parler en français. I will be speaking in French. Donc, le réseau environnemental.
So the Environmental Network is a communication group. It's a non-profit that links together over 110 non-profit environmental organizations. The idea is to facilitate the work between groups and other sectors like government, universities, industry. So we have a fairly long history of working on climate change, among other things, through our collective to climate change adaptation and through a project that Adam is going to address later on, where we've worked on climate solutions based on nature with engineers and so on. So this today is a continuation of this work, and you're going to learn more about this later on.
Thank you, Annika, for that introduction.
Switch to English.
And with that, I will be passing it over to Adam Cheeseman from NatureNB, who's our project partner on this project, and to give us a bit of an introduction to NatureNB, as well as the history of our work with the BRACE project and nature-based climate solutions in New Brunswick.
Okay, thanks everybody. I'm going to do my brief talk in English. I'm just going to take a second to share my screen. So I think everybody should see some slides up now. Perfect. Yeah, hi, welcome everybody. As Lily mentioned, my name is Adam Cheeseman. I work for an organization called NatureNB. We recently celebrated our 50-year anniversary. We're an organization that started from a coming together of various different naturalist clubs from around the province. And we have a number of pillars of work that we undertake as part of our organization. Historically, we've done a lot of education programs in and out of schools. We do a lot of conservation planning and work with species at risk across the province. And we also do a lot around celebrating nature and promoting stewardship amongst everyday New Brunswickers. And a few years ago, we started working a little bit more on the climate change side of things, recognizing that a lot of our members and clubs and programs were starting to, talk more about climate change and get more involved in that. And so, our perspective on the climate change work is really on working with nature, which is kind of what we're here to talk about today. And Lily's going to go a bit more in depth than I probably will, but just to give kind of a cursory look, a preliminary look. When we're talking about working with nature to prepare ourselves to adapt to climate change or reduce the impacts or mitigate climate change, there's a number of things that we can think about. But generally speaking, what we're looking at is our natural areas that are healthy provide many different services, free services to our communities. So whether that be having healthy upland forests that filter our air and hold on to floodwaters in the upper parts of our watersheds or our catchment basins, whether we have wetlands within our communities that can help store water to reduce flooding. We also can think about having, healthy vegetated buffers along our waterways and our streams and our rivers to promote good water quality and also slow down water as it moves through those systems. So in a number of ways, nature can really help us to reduce those impacts of extreme weather events, whether that be along the coast or inland. And in addition to that, they provide a number of what we call co-benefits or extra advantages to these types of approaches. So in a lot of cases, if we're working to protect or restore nature, we're getting the added benefit of, that climate protection, but we're also getting, high quality habitat. We're having more opportunities to open up our communities for tourism and recreation that's focused around nature. We're promoting our water quality and making, our places safer. And a number of other co-benefits. So this is why we have chosen to kind of work and kind of promote this type of avenue in our climate change work. And as was mentioned earlier, we have recently come off of a project in partnership with the NBEN and a number of other partners that was funded through Natural Resources Canada through their BRACE program. And the BRACE project really focused on trying to document and identify where these nature-based climate solutions were taking place on the ground, and figuring out ways to increase the capacity and expertise on how to implement these types of projects among NGOs, land use planners, and engineers. So one of the first things we did with this project, which you can see here on the slide, is we created a project map in partnership with Nature Canada that highlights various different case studies or different approaches that have been taken to work with nature to adapt to climate change in Atlantic Canada, and then it's been recently expanded nationally. And this is just a screenshot from our website, which is Natural Infrastructure NB, which we can probably share in the chat at some point, which we use to kind of communicate information about the BRACE project as well as this project. And really, it serves as kind of a community of practice or like a hub for people to come and get information, to exchange ideas with one another, and learn a little bit more about this type of approach. Also on the website, if you check it out, in addition to the map, we have a video series of various different projects that have been highlighted from New Brunswick over the years. And this is a great resource to check out if you're interested in kind of starting in one of these types of projects or just interested in learning more about what your community can do to work with nature to adapt climate change. And Lily asked me to kind of cover off a couple of examples of the types of projects that we're thinking about or we're talking about when we say nature-based climate solutions, because it's a bit of a catchy term this day and age that a lot of people are using. But just to give some kind of concrete examples, this is a picture of a what's called a naturalized stormwater pond in my home community in Sackville in southeast New Brunswick. And this is a pond that is meant to fluctuate in water levels after large and small rain events. And so this was an engineered system that was put together a few years ago that could have been structured like a typical detention pond. You know, they could have dug a big pit and put a bunch of pipes that drained into it, and then the water would have eventually traveled through the system into existing stormwater infrastructure and out into the Bay of Fundy. But instead, the community came together and the town came together, and we decided to, pursue a different direction for this. And so what we ended up doing, similar to what they've done in many other communities, is develop a more naturalized approach. So this is a system that is constructed with various different aspects of the environment in mind, from leaving mature trees on site to making sure that when they were doing the grade on the slopes for where the water would be sitting, that they incorporated steps for amphibians and reptiles, for example, to eventually breed in these areas. So this is just an example of a piece of infrastructure that's really meant to serve a purpose when it comes to adapting to climate change, in terms of holding on to floodwater, keeping it off of road infrastructure and out of businesses and out of homes that are nearby, but also incorporates a lot of those natural elements as well. And this is actually a picture of it the day after Hurricane Fiona. So it's obviously at the peak of its storage capacity, or close to. Another example of these types of projects are things like dune restoration projects. So a number of groups in the southeast part of the province, but as well as the Acadian Peninsula, and recently we hosted with co-hosted with the Nature Conservancy of Canada, an event like this on Miscou Island, involves taking and transplanting marram grass onto dune systems to help to stabilize them over time. So marram grass is a great grass that many of us are probably familiar with and seeing in our beach and dune environments. But the really cool thing about marram grass, that has these deep root systems that helps to hold on to sediment and hold on to sand. So when it experiences wind erosion or storm surges, it's more likely to stabilize the dune and hold it there in place. And so we can understand from that perspective the protection that it might provide for our communities that it might be behind the dune, for our recreation infrastructure like boardwalks or beaches that people like to go and visit, as well as for wildlife and for species. And just as another example of this type of approach, this is a photo from the Bathurst region, where we're actually hoping to pursue a project where we're going to be doing a bit of a shoreline restoration, incorporating a lot of different natural elements, but also considering bank swallow habitats. All these little holes that you see in the top of the cliff that's in the image are used regularly by bank swallow each year for breeding while they're in New Brunswick. And so just to show, when we're thinking about these types of solutions, again, the co-benefits. So if we were to go ahead and put rock armor along the shoreline, for example, and then that was the solution that we chose to go with in terms of protecting the land behind this coastal cliff, those bank swallow would lose that habitat, and we would also lose out on other opportunities that a more naturalized approach might provide. So just as an example, those are the types of things that we're looking to pursue when we're thinking about the co-benefit side of things. And finally, another big one to kind of keep in mind as we go through the discussion today, we always think of it as really important from the restoration and kind of building infrastructure side of things to incorporate nature in these different types of projects. But another really big key piece, especially for municipalities and for other people involved in climate adaptation work, is to think about what's currently on the landscape. So if there's ways that we can work to protect and conserve what's already on the landscape, whether that be in things like sustainable subdivision design or setting aside areas with conservation bylaws to make sure that there's healthy wetland areas and healthy forests kind of embedded within our communities, then that's really going to help us not only adapt to climate change through holding on to floodwater and mitigating extreme weather events, but it's also going to provide those other opportunities for good quality wildlife habitat, protecting water quality, and also providing potentially opportunities for tourism and recreation. So really, it's a win-win-win situation when we're thinking about how do we work with nature from the perspective of restoration, but also how do we work with nature from the perspective of conserving areas, to leave them untouched, so they can continue to provide those services for us. And finally, just as a quick note, some key messages that we've learned through going through this project that I mentioned at the beginning, where we were, trying to do some professional development with engineers and land use planners and NGOs, is we really learned that there's no one size fits all approach to doing this type of work. But we also learned a lot that local governments and municipalities are already innovating and already working to maximize these co-benefits and advance nature-based climate solutions throughout the province. And so what we're hoping to do with this project that Lily will share a little bit more about shortly is really support municipalities and understand how we can help to build their capacity and expertise in this realm as well, in order to make sure that all of our communities are as resilient as possible over time. So that's it for me for now. I think I'll see some of you in the breakout sessions to come, but I'll pass it back over to Lily for now.
Great. Thanks so much, Adam, for that great coverage of some of the great projects that have already been in place in New Brunswick, as well as the work that was done during the BRACE project. So I don't want to repeat too much of the great information that Adam just shared, and really want to get to the discussions, but I just want to quickly, give a little bit of an introduction to some of the things we're going to discuss today in the breakout rooms, as well as the project and what we're doing right now and where we're going from here. So really soon we're going to hear from you all how you've experienced the changing climate in your communities. But in general, New Brunswick is experiencing many different aspects of the climate crisis already. Along in coastal communities, there's a high risk of flooding and storm surges, as well as erosion. And many of these cause many risks to small and rural communities right along the coast. And we saw the impacts of Hurricane Fiona, as well as other extreme weather events that really caused large problems across the province, but particularly in smaller and coastal communities. We're also seeing warmer winter temperatures and hotter heat waves during the summer, as well as more extreme winds and changes in growing seasons and migration for animals that live here in New Brunswick. And these are the impacts that we're already seeing, and these are just going to continue to get worse. That's why it's really important that we're talking about how we can effectively adapt to climate change and mitigate it at this point, when we can prevent and avoid some of the future impacts, or how strongly they impact our communities. Adam spoke a lot about those nature-based infrastructure pieces that have already been put into place. There's some terminology that differentiates between gray or conventional infrastructure, and these are things that can be used to adapt or mitigate these impacts of climate change that use fabricated materials and are human-made and engineered, like seawalls, dams, culverts, or pipes. But on the flip side of that are these nature-based or natural pieces of infrastructure, and these are infrastructure that uses the strengths of natural ecosystems in mitigating and adapting to climate change, and integrates them either in a hybrid way with some human-made infrastructure, or works to restore and maintain things like wetlands or living coastlines to help reduce those risks. And these may be things like parks, rain gardens on a smaller scale, living shorelines, urban forests, or more hybrid features like permeable pavement or green roofs. And I won't go too much into this because Adam did a great job giving us some ideas about what co-benefits using nature-based infrastructure bring. But as I mentioned, they can help protect and restore natural areas and ecosystems, provide opportunities for green space and recreation, as well as active transportation in communities, help to reduce carbon emissions through carbon sequestration, and can mitigate these effects of climate change that we're feeling here in New Brunswick. So how are we going to build this capacity? Adam spoke to the fact that with the BRACE project, it became really clear that there's interest and knowledge being built around nature-based solutions in New Brunswick, but that has not translated yet to large-scale implementation across the province. And particularly that at the local level in municipal governments, that there is a lack of understanding or capacity to be able to make these projects come into fruition. And so that's why this project, we are focusing on municipalities and local government, because not only is it possible to implement these infrastructure on a local level, but the local level and local services are often where the worst impacts of these extreme weather events and climate change are felt, and where efforts to mitigate them can be the most effective. It's really meaningful and impactful for residents in a community if there's a new wetland park that's built that not only helps to mitigate those effects of flooding, but it can improve water and air quality. It can provide an educational and recreational experience and improve the quality of life overall. And so this project is really focused on supporting local governments in New Brunswick to build that capacity and work towards implementing nature-based solutions. And we're doing this in three main ways. So we have these engagement sessions. This is one of them that we're holding that's with municipal participation. We have elected officials as well as staff, as well as community organizations that work with municipalities and really work to implement these solutions on the ground. And we've held some in person. We held one in Dieppe, one in Fredericton, and one in Edmonton, and we'll be holding our last one in Quispamsis near St. John next week. And then this online session, and we're also working with our advisory committee members at the Union of Municipalities of New Brunswick and l'Association francophone des municipalités du Nouveau-Brunswick to hold webinars on this project and mini engagement sessions with their members in the upcoming weeks. We also recently finished a survey of public opinion of residents in New Brunswick on the understanding for and support of nature-based climate solutions. And I'll share a couple, great findings, very preliminary, in just a moment, but we'll be sharing that information and it will help inform this last piece, which is what we're moving forward to in the coming months, which is developing a cost-benefit analysis tool that can help municipalities evaluate nature-based solutions and incorporate the whole benefits and more social benefits of implementing nature-based solutions, as well as hopefully the costs over the life cycle of materials for building a conventional solution over as compared to a nature-based solution. And the results from the engagement sessions and the survey of public opinion are going to help inform the tool to make sure it's really rooted in the needs of communities here in New Brunswick. And once it's created, we'll be piloting it in 2 communities in New Brunswick, likely one rural, one urban, and one francophone, one anglophone, and developing training materials and guides and mentoring in those communities to implement it and adapt it so it'll be the most useful for them. So our public survey of opinion showed that climate change is a large concern for residents in New Brunswick. 75% of respondents indicated that they are concerned or very concerned about the impacts of climate change, and that they're most concerned about how climate change can increase the cost and availability of food, and that this is, in general, the availability of food is of high concern, particularly when it will be exacerbated by the climate crisis. However, the vast majority of respondents felt woefully unprepared to adapt or mitigate climate change. And we asked how they felt on a personal level in terms of preparedness, and 80% felt that they are not prepared to respond to the impacts of climate change. But on a larger scale, 88% felt that their local governments were not prepared to respond to climate change, and 88% felt that the provincial government was not prepared to respond to climate change. So there's a lot of concern and a lot of worry that we are not prepared to respond. We also shared a definition of nature-based climate solutions and some infographics to help explain what they were in the survey. But prior to this survey, only 22% of respondents had heard the term nature-based climate solutions. And as well, only 18% of respondents knew that the New Brunswick government had released a recent updated climate action plan that speaks to the need and effectiveness of nature-based climate solutions. So this makes it really clear that a lot of education is also needed. And this is something that has come up in many of the engagement sessions we've held thus far, is not only does there need to be education and training on a municipal level with decision makers and staff, but also for the public. But when we asked about what co-benefits community residents would value in terms of what nature-based solutions could bring to their communities, the most important one was indicated to be improvement to physical and mental health and well-being, improved water quality, as well as economic opportunities for residents. So I've spoken a little bit about who's involved in this project. As I mentioned, here at the New Brunswick Environmental Network, we are the project lead. I'm the project coordinator for the project, and Annika, who is our executive director, is also very involved in the project. And we've got also a couple others from our team here, Zahira and Zomi, to help out with breakout rooms and taking care of all the tech behind the scenes. We also have our project partner, Nature NB, with Adam here today. You just heard from him. We have an advisory committee that is made up of representatives from Climate Atlantic, Infrastructure Canada, the New Brunswick Climate Change Secretariat, the Union of New Brunswick Municipalities, and l'Association francophone des municipalités du Nouveau-Brunswick. And this project is funded in part by Infrastructure Canada, as well as the Environmental Trust Fund in New Brunswick. So the last thing I want to share before we move into our breakout room discussions is that we have an online community of practice, which we'll be sharing the link for in the chat. And after this call, I will also send out a follow-up email with links to this PowerPoint and the community of practice. And our community of practice has a lot of case studies. It links to that map that Adam shared in his presentation, as well as details on a few specific examples throughout New Brunswick. Has access to a calendar of events coming up, as well as a bunch of resources that can help in terms of the technical components of building nature-based infrastructure and the resources regarding the policy side as well. And there's an opportunity to interact with other interested practitioners throughout New Brunswick or elsewhere as well, though this is oriented towards New Brunswick. So we really encourage you to check out the community of practice and join it and get involved.